Ayanna had always been a woman of the land. Born and raised in a small Apache village, surrounded by the vast deserts of the Southwest, she knew the rhythms of nature like the back of her hand. She was strong, proud, and deeply connected to her culture. But there was one thing that kept her awake at night, filling her heart with longing and uncertainty, a deep, aching desire to become a mother. She had grown up watching other women in her village care for their children, their families. It seemed like such a simple, natural part of life. But for Ayanna, it was something that felt out of reach. She was older now, well into her 20s, yet she had never been able to find a man with whom she could share her dreams of motherhood. In her village, where tradition and the old ways were held in high regard, it wasn't simply about choosing a partner. It was about finding the right person who would be willing to honor the bond, raise children together, and help ensure the survival of the Apache ways. For Ayanna, the perfect match never seemed to come. As a young girl, Ayanna had often dreamed of the day she would hold a child in her arms, her own flesh and blood, someone who would carry on the traditions of their ancestors. She longed for a child to raise and to teach the ways of their people, to hunt, to gather, to respect the earth, and to live by the values of respect, honor, and strength. But despite her desires, the right man had never appeared in her life. At first, it hadn't seemed like a big deal. She had been young and carefree, focused on learning the skills she would need to contribute to the village, preparing food, helping with the crops, learning how to make clothing, and assisting the elders. She was considered a good woman in the eyes of the community. But still, the other women had children. They had husbands. They had families. And she was still alone. As time passed, Ayanna's sense of loneliness grew. The village was small, and everyone knew everyone else's business. It was nearly impossible to go a day without hearing about the latest births, marriages, or family gatherings. And as she saw other women holding their babies, talking about the joys and struggles of motherhood, her heart would ache. It wasn't jealousy. It was a deep, unspoken yearning. She knew that, in the world of the Apache, a woman without a family was often viewed as incomplete. She had everything she needed, everything the village expected of her, but she didn't have a child. There were a few men in the village who had shown an interest in her over the years. Some had even asked for her hand in marriage, but Ayanna had never felt a true connection with any of them. She wanted more than just a man to be by her side. She wanted a partner, someone who shared her vision for the future, someone who would be willing to raise a child with her. But none of the men who approached her seemed to understand her desires. Perhaps it was because the world she lived in was changing. The old ways of the Apache were not as strong as they once were. Outsiders, settlers, and newcomers from other tribes had begun to move into the region, altering the landscape of life. There were fewer men like the ones her grandmother had known, strong, honorable, who valued tradition and family above all else. Instead, many men in the village were turning their attention to survival, to navigating the changing world around them, and not to raising families. Ayanna could sense this shift, and it saddened her. The tribe, which had once been so close-knit, was now becoming fragmented in ways she couldn't quite put her finger on. In the stillness of the desert, under the vast sky that stretched endlessly above, Ayanna would sometimes sit alone, her mind racing with thoughts about the future. She knew that time was passing. She wasn't a girl anymore. Every year that went by without a child seemed to erase her chances. Some nights, when the moon hung low and the desert wind whispered through the trees, she would lie awake, staring at the stars and imagining a different life, a life where she wasn't alone, where her arms were full of warmth and love, where the sound of children's laughter echoed through her home. But then reality would settle back in. The elders would look at her with kind, understanding eyes, but they didn't say much about her loneliness. It wasn't something that was openly discussed in her culture. After all, the women around her had children, They were fulfilling their roles. It was just Ayanna who seemed left behind. It wasn't that she didn't try to fit in, or that she wasn't a part of her community. She was. She helped out when needed, shared her knowledge, and worked as hard as anyone else. But still, the silence around her seemed to grow. The other women were quick to offer advice, often encouraging her to be patient, to wait for the right man to come along. "He'll come," they would say. "The right man will come when the time is right." But Ayanna had grown tired of waiting for someone to arrive. She wanted more than patience. She wanted control over her future. She had spent enough time letting life unfold in ways she couldn't predict, and now she was ready to make a choice. She realized one day that it was not just about waiting for the perfect man to walk into her life. It was about taking charge of her destiny. If the man she dreamed of did not exist, perhaps it was time to find another way. She had heard rumors about men from outside her tribe, men who traveled through the land, seeking work, seeking purpose. They weren't Apache, but they were human. And so, the idea began to grow within Ayanna's mind. It was an idea that seemed almost foreign at first, but as she thought about it more, it felt like the only path left to her. She didn't need to wait for the perfect match, for the perfect moment. Maybe, just maybe, she could find what she was looking for on her own terms. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She had lived her life in accordance with the expectations of her people, but she realized that it was time to live for herself. She wanted a child. She wanted to raise a family. And if that meant stepping outside the boundaries of tradition, she was ready to do it. Ayanna knew the journey ahead would be difficult, that her decision would bring challenges and consequences she hadn't fully thought through. But in her heart, she felt that it was the right thing to do. The decision was no longer about just her. It was about the future she wanted to create for herself and for the child she hoped to one day hold in her arms. She was ready to take the first step toward that future, no matter where it led her. And so, the seeds of change were planted. The young Apache woman, driven by an inner need that could no longer be ignored, prepared to step into uncharted territory, searching for the one thing that had eluded her for so long, a child of her own. Ayanna had spent several days thinking about her decision. The idea had taken root in her mind, and now there was no turning back. She had known for a long time that her life needed to change, but she had never expected it to come to this, seeking out someone she didn't know, someone from outside her world. Yet, the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She had to take matters into her own hands if she was going to fulfill the deep desire that had been growing inside her for years. She wasn't sure exactly where to begin, so she walked through the village each day, keeping her eyes open, hoping to spot a man who might be passing through. It was strange to think of approaching a stranger in this way, but the more she dwelled on it, the less strange it seemed. What did she have to lose? One evening, as the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the land, she saw him. Ayanna had been walking near the edge of the village when a figure caught her eye. A man. He was tall, with a rough, weathered look about him, his clothes dusted with the marks of travel. There was something different about him, something that made her pause. He wasn't Apache, that much was clear. His clothes were strange, and his mannerisms were unfamiliar. He wasn't a man who belonged here, but somehow he seemed to be searching for something just as she was. His name, she would later learn, was Caleb. He was a wanderer, a man of few words, who moved from place to place, never staying in one place for long. He had come from the east, crossing rivers and deserts, seeking work and the freedom to roam. Caleb had been passing through the desert, not expecting to find anyone, when he arrived at the small Apache village. He had heard of it from a trader a few days before, and curiosity had led him to stop for a short while. When Ayanna first saw him, she didn't know what to think. He looked strong, rugged, yet somehow distant. His eyes were tired, and his face showed the marks of a long journey. He seemed like a man who had seen more of the world than he cared to share. Someone who had lived a life full of challenges and hardships. She couldn't help but wonder what brought him here, to this small, remote corner of the world. The moment he saw her, their eyes met across the village square. There was something about him that made her heart race. A feeling she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was a connection, a curiosity that sparked between them. She had always been someone who relied on instinct, and now, instinct told her that this man might be the answer to her silent prayer. Over the next few days, Ayana found ways to be near him without being too obvious. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but there was something comforting in just being around him. Caleb didn't speak much. But when he did, his voice was low and steady. The kind of voice that hinted at wisdom and experience. It was clear that he wasn't here to stay, that he would soon leave the village as quietly as he had arrived. But there was an odd feeling in Ayana's heart. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen if she spoke to him, if she took the chance to share her thoughts with him. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Ayana approached Caleb. She had thought about it for a long time. And now that the moment had arrived, there was no turning back. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward him. Caleb was sitting by a fire, a few logs arranged in a circle. He was cleaning the small knife he carried with him, his movements methodical and practiced. He looked up as Ayana neared, and for a moment, the world seemed to slow down. "Hello," she said softly, unsure of where to begin. Caleb nodded, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Hello," he replied, his voice warm but cautious. He wasn't used to being approached by strangers, especially not by a woman in a village like this. But there was something in her eyes that made him pause, something that made him curious. Ayana sat down across from him, her heart racing. She didn't know how to start, but she knew she had to say something. After a long pause, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I have a request," she said, her voice steady but filled with an intensity she couldn't hide. "I want a child. I want a child." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Caleb didn't know how to respond. He had heard many things in his life, but never anything quite like this. Ayana's directness caught him off guard. It wasn't the kind of request one expected in a world where customs and expectations were so deeply ingrained. Ayana continued, her words coming faster now, as if once they had been spoken, they could no longer be taken back. "I want a child," she repeated, "and I think you can help me." Caleb was silent for a long moment. He studied her face, trying to understand what she meant. There was something in her eyes that spoke of longing, of a need that went deeper than simple words could express. He had traveled across many lands, met many people, but never had he encountered a woman like Ayana. She wasn't asking for something small, something fleeting. She was asking for something profound, something that would change the course of her life forever. And in that moment, Caleb realized that he couldn't turn away from her. "Why me?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with curiosity. Ayana looked down, her hands nervously twisting together in her lap. Caleb's mind was spinning. He had never expected anything like this. But as he looked at her, at the strength in her face, the determination in her eyes, he found that he couldn't say no. He didn't know what this would mean, or how it would change both of their lives. But something deep inside him told him that this was a crossroads. A moment that could not be ignored. For a long time, he said nothing. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the quiet evening air. Ayana sat still, waiting for him to speak, unsure of what he would say. Finally, Caleb looked up at her. "Tonight," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I will help you." Ayana's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this response, but now that it was spoken, it felt right. She nodded, her mind already racing with the possibilities. That night, under the same sky that had witnessed so many decisions before them, Ayanna and Caleb would share something that neither of them could have anticipated. The world around them would continue on, unchanged in its vastness. But for these two souls, something was about to shift in ways they couldn't yet understand. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the land, Ayanna couldn't help but feel an odd mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She had said the words she had kept locked inside for so long, and now they hung in the air between her and Caleb. His response was still fresh in her mind. "Tonight, I will help you." But what did that really mean? She had never done something like this before. She was used to the customs of her people, to the traditions that had shaped her life, and the life of every woman in her village. Asking a man for a child, especially a man who was a stranger, was unheard of. And yet, in the quiet of the evening, with the cool desert breeze brushing against her skin, Ayanna felt a sense of resolve settle deep within her. She had made a choice, and she was going to see it through. Caleb sat across from her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. His silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was thoughtful. Ayanna could tell he was still processing what she had said. After all, how could he not be? He wasn't from this world. And yet, there was something about her presence, something about the intensity in her voice that made him want to understand her better. The night stretched on, and the village seemed to fall into a quiet calm. The sounds of the desert, the rustling of the wind, the distant calls of animals filled the space. But the world around them felt distant, as if it had faded away in the wake of Ayanna's bold offer. She wasn't sure how much time passed, but when she finally spoke again, it was with a steady voice that betrayed no doubt. "I know what I am asking of you," she said softly, her gaze meeting Caleb's. "And I know it's not simple. But I don't want anything from you except what we agreed upon. No promises, no ties. I just need a child. That's all. I want to. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. He studied her face, trying to understand the depth of her request. It was clear to him that this wasn't a decision made lightly. Ayanna was not asking for something casual or fleeting. This wasn't about romance or love. It was something deeper, something that spoke to her need for purpose, for fulfillment, for a piece of herself that could live on long after she was gone. And though he had never been in a position where a woman asked him for something like this, he understood the gravity of her words. "I understand," he said at last, his voice low but steady. He didn't know what this would mean, but in that moment, he felt a strange sense of agreement with her. "I'll do what you've asked." "Jetter." Ayanna nodded. She felt a strange sense of relief wash over her, but there was no time to dwell on it. The decision had been made, and now, they both had to follow through. The air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts, but neither of them said anything further. There was nothing left to say. They spent the next few hours in silence, sitting by the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. Ayanna's mind wandered to the future, the child she hoped to carry in her arms one day, the life she would build for him or her. It was a dream she had carried with her for so long, and now it felt like that dream was within her reach. But the weight of it, the enormity of what she had just done, settled in. She wasn't sure if she had made the right choice, but she couldn't turn back now. Caleb, too, was deep in thought. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't planned on becoming a part of someone's life in this way. He had always been a loner, drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to form any real connections. He had seen the world, met people from all walks of life, but never had he been asked for something like this. There was no blueprint for what they were doing, no instructions, just a decision made in the heat of the moment, an understanding between two people who didn't quite know where this path would lead. As the night wore on, The fire slowly burned down to embers. The stars above seemed closer now, their light shining brighter in the vast, endless sky. The quiet of the desert night enveloped them, and for the first time in a long while, Ayanna felt at peace. She had done what she needed to do. She had taken control of her life in a way she never had before. "I'll stay here tonight," she said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. "We'll do what we agreed upon, and then we'll both move on. There will be no ties between us. This is just a moment in time, nothing more." Caleb looked at her, his face shadowed by the dim light of the fire. He nodded slowly, understanding the finality of her words. He didn't know what to expect in the hours to come, but he knew that this would change both of their lives. There was something raw and honest about their agreement, something that neither of them could ignore. They were both at a crossroads, each in search of something they couldn't quite define. The air grew cooler as the night deepened, and Ayanna led Caleb to a small, quiet part of the village, where the two of them could be alone. There was no romance, no passion in the air, only the sense of two people coming together to fulfill a deep, personal need. It was an arrangement, nothing more. In the stillness of the desert night, they shared a quiet moment, a moment that would forever be a part of their lives. Ayanna's heart was full of hope and longing, her dream of motherhood finally taking shape. Caleb, too, felt a strange sense of connection to her, a connection that went beyond what either of them had expected. When it was over, the world seemed unchanged. The desert still stretched out in every direction. The stars still shone brightly overhead. But for Ayanna, everything had shifted. She had taken control of her life in a way she never had before. The decision was hers, and no matter what came next, she knew she had done what she needed to do. Caleb left the village the next morning, without a word, as silently as he had arrived. He knew that their paths had crossed for a reason, but he didn't know what that reason was. He didn't expect to see Ayanna again, nor did she expect to see him. Their lives would continue, each of them carrying the weight of that night with them. For Ayanna, the future felt uncertain, but there was a new light in her heart. She had made her decision, and now she would wait. The child she had longed for would one day come, and when that day came, she would be ready. The days following that night felt strange for Ayanna. She had made a decision, one that had been so clear in her mind when she had made it. But now that it was over, the world seemed to have shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. There were no regrets, but there was a lingering silence, a kind of quiet after the storm that she didn't quite know how to navigate. Caleb had left the village at first light, just as quietly as he had arrived. He hadn't said goodbye, and Ayanna hadn't expected him to. He was a man of few words, and perhaps their time together had meant as little to him as it had to her at least. That's what she told herself. Yet, as the days passed, she couldn't help but wonder what thoughts were left in his mind. Was it just another fleeting moment for him? A small detour on his long journey? Or had it meant something more? But Ayanna knew better than to dwell on such thoughts. She had never been the type to wait for answers that might never come. She had made her choice, and now it was time to focus on what mattered: the future. Days turned into weeks, and Ayanna's life slowly began to return to its normal rhythm. She worked in the village, helped with the crops, and spent time with the elders, as she always had. But inside her, something had shifted. There was a quiet strength that had taken root in her heart, a confidence that had been born of taking control of her own fate. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in charge of her life. No longer did she have to wait for the perfect partner or the right circumstances. She had made a choice, and now she would face whatever came next. Still, there was an emptiness that lingered, a quiet longing that she couldn't completely ignore. The decision to seek out Caleb, to ask him for what she had wanted for so long, had been empowering in many ways. But it had also left her with a strange sense of uncertainty. She had hoped that becoming a mother would fill the hole she had felt in her heart for so long. But it wasn't just the child she longed for. It was the connection, the love, the sense of family that came with it. And now, as she went about her days, that feeling of loneliness seemed to grow in subtle ways. It wasn't that Ayanna regretted what had happened. She didn't. The child she carried inside her was a reminder of the strength it had taken to ask for what she wanted, to make a choice that had never been made before in her village. But in the quiet moments when she found herself alone, especially as the nights grew colder and the days shorter, the silence was deafening. One afternoon, as she sat near the edge of the village, gazing out at the desert landscape, she thought about Caleb. She wondered where he was, what he was doing. He had never stayed in one place for long, and she knew he would have moved on. She had expected it, but that didn't make it any easier. They had shared something, however brief, something that had changed them both in ways they could never explain. It wasn't love, but it was something real. She was startled from her thoughts by a sound behind her. She turned to see one of the older women from the village walking toward her. The woman, named Kia, was known for her wisdom and her quiet way of seeing through to the heart of matters. She had always been kind to Ayanna, offering her advice when it was needed, and simply listening when Ayanna needed to talk. "Ayanna," Kia said softly as she approached, her eyes filled with understanding. Ayanna smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I am well, Kia. Everything is fine." Kia sat down beside her, her gaze following Ayanna's as she looked out at the desert. "It is good to hear you say that. But I know better than to believe that everything is fine when a woman's heart is unsettled." Ayanna felt a rush of emotion in her chest. She had never been one to hide her feelings from Kia. The older woman had always seen through her, always knew when something was wrong, even when Ayanna tried to keep it hidden. "It's strange, Kia," Ayanna confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "I did what I thought I needed to do. I wanted a child, and I have made that choice. But there is something inside me that feels different now. Something that I cannot explain." Kia nodded, her expression soft with empathy. "You have taken a brave step, Ayanna, a step that not many would have the courage to take. But be gentle with yourself. Just because you made a choice does not mean the feelings that come with it will be simple." Ayanna sighed, her gaze turning to the ground. "I thought I would feel complete. I thought having a child would make everything fall into place. But now, I realize that I don't just want a child. I want the connection, the love. I want what I see in other families, that bond between mother and father, between the child and the village. I thought I could do this alone, but now I'm not so sure." Kia placed a hand on Ayanna's arm, a gesture of reassurance. "You are not alone, Ayanna, and you will never be alone. The child you carry inside you will be your greatest gift, but it will not fill the emptiness that you feel in your heart. That emptiness is something you must learn to understand. You must find peace with yourself before you can find peace with others." Ayanna nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood. She had always been strong, always prided herself on her independence. But now, as she thought about the future, she realized that strength alone wasn't enough. She had made a choice, but the journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. There was more to motherhood than she had imagined, more to family than she had ever been able to grasp. As the days passed, Ayanna found herself preparing for the future in ways she hadn't anticipated. She began to spend more time with the elders, learning from their wisdom, asking questions about motherhood and family. She wanted to be ready for the child she would bring into the world, and she wanted to understand what it meant to truly raise a family. There were still moments of doubt, of loneliness, but there was also a quiet sense of hope that had settled within her. She had made a choice, and now, for better or worse, she would face the consequences. She had no idea where Caleb was or what he was doing. But for the first time, she realized that it didn't matter. She had already taken the first step toward the life she had dreamed of. The child she carried would be her greatest gift, and she would raise it with the strength and wisdom of her ancestors. The weeks that followed were a blur for Ayanna. Her life, once centered around the familiar rhythms of daily work in the village, now seemed to revolve around her growing belly and the child that was to come. It wasn't that she felt overwhelmed, but there was a quiet shift in everything she did. She woke each morning with a sense of purpose, a feeling of anticipation, but also uncertainty. There were moments when the weight of the decision she had made hung heavy on her heart, and she would wonder whether she had done the right thing. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone at the edge of the village or walked along the dry riverbeds, she thought about Caleb. She didn't know where he was now. She hadn't expected him to stay, and yet, there were times when she found herself wishing that he had. She hadn't asked for love or a lasting connection, but there had been something about that night. They had shared something that felt significant, even if it was just a fleeting moment. But she had no time for regrets. Her life was moving forward, and she had made a choice. She would raise this child on her own. The days began to grow warmer as the seasons shifted, and with each passing day, Ayanna could feel her body changing. Her pregnancy was progressing, and though it wasn't always easy, there was a quiet joy that came with the knowledge that soon she would hold a child in her arms. It was a feeling she had longed for, a dream that was finally becoming reality. And yet, with that joy, came the constant reminder of her solitude. She had chosen this path, and though she would never regret it, she also knew that it was not going to be simple. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon in soft hues of orange and pink, Ayanna sat outside her small home, looking out over the desert. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. The silence of the desert had become a comfort to her over the past few months. The winds whispered through the trees, and the stars began to appear in the sky, one by one. It was in moments like these that Ayanna felt most connected to the land, to her ancestors, and to the life growing inside her. She had never felt more in tune with her purpose. Yet, she also knew that motherhood was not something she could face alone. She had spent much of her life being independent, relying on herself to get by. But she realized now that there was more to raising a child than strength and resilience. The village women, Kia, her elders, and the other mothers had offered her guidance, shared their wisdom, and helped her prepare for the future. Their support was invaluable, and in many ways, it made her feel less alone in her decision. But still, there were moments when she wished for a partner to share in the joy and the struggle, someone who would stand by her side as she raised her child. But as much as Ayanna wished for the ideal family, she knew that her reality was different. She had made a choice to be a mother on her own terms, and now it was time to embrace that choice fully. The child she carried would not be born into a traditional family, but it would be born into a life full of love and determination. Ayanna would give everything she had to ensure that her child grew up strong, wise, and proud of their heritage. As the months passed, Ayanna's body grew heavier, and the time drew nearer. The village was abuzz with excitement, as it always was when a woman was about to give birth. It was a time of great celebration. And though Ayanna had always kept to herself, she felt the warmth of the village's support. Her pregnancy was seen as a gift, a blessing, and it was something that brought the entire community together. The women began to prepare for the arrival of the child, gathering blankets, clothes, and food, ready to help Ayanna in any way they could. Though Ayanna had once felt isolated in her longing for a child, now she felt surrounded by love and community. She had made a choice that had shaped her future, but it was a future that no longer felt so uncertain. She was not alone in this journey. The village was her family, and they would help her raise this child as their own. The day of the birth arrived quietly, as all things do when they are most expected. Ayanna had prepared herself for the pain and the effort it would take, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming joy she felt when she finally held her baby in her arms. The moment she looked into the tiny face of her child, everything changed. It was as if the world had fallen into place, as if all the doubts and fears she had carried with her for so long had disappeared in an instant. The baby was a girl, with dark eyes that seemed to take in the world around her with curiosity, and a soft cry that echoed through the room like a song of life. Ayanna could feel her heart swell with love for this tiny, perfect creature, and in that moment, she knew that everything had been worth it. She had made the right decision. As the baby slept in her arms, Ayanna thought about the road she had traveled. It had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of loneliness, and of fear. But now, with her daughter in her arms, all of that seemed insignificant. She had made a choice to become a mother. And, in doing so, she had created a life that would carry on her legacy, her strength, and her love. And though she would never forget the man who had helped her bring this child into the world, she realized that it was not Caleb who had given her what she needed, it was herself. She had taken control of her own life, her own destiny. And she had created the family she had always dreamed of. As the days passed and her daughter grew, Ayanna poured all of her love and energy into raising her. She taught her the ways of their people, shared the stories of their ancestors, and ensured that she would grow up strong, kind, and proud of her heritage. Ayanna had created a family, not the one she had imagined, but one that was just as full of love, joy, and meaning. She had chosen this life, and now it was her life to live. The desert around them remained unchanged. The winds continued to blow, and the stars still twinkled in the night sky. But for Ayanna, everything was different now. She had found peace, not in the life she had expected, but in the life she had made for herself and her daughter. And as she looked down at her child, she knew that the future was hers to shape.